Welcome to the Humans Outside podcast, where we are building a life around getting outdoors through learning from fascinating outside-minded guests. I'm Amy Bouchatz, a journalist originally from the beach in California, now working to love nature from my home in Alaska. Since September 2017, I've spent at least 20 consecutive minutes outside every single day, no matter the weather. On this show, we hear from others who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same. If you love what we do, you can support Humans Outside on Patreon or leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Ready for the good stuff? Let's go. When I set out to look at how the outdoors changes us when we build a lifestyle around spending time in nature daily, I thought of a lot of different things it might influence. I knew about nature therapy, so I thought about how it helps heal trauma by giving you a place to process it. I thought that I might feel or be more creative, more mindful, healthier, that it might help me grow better relationships, and so much more. But never once did I ever consider that it would help me forgive. Today's guest, Sara Schulting Kranz, is a wilderness guide, a life and leadership coach, and a certified multidimensional partner trauma model therapist. In addition to one-on-one coaching, she leads men and women on healing retreats primarily in the Grand Canyon. She's an endurance athlete, a TEDx speaker, and most recently, the author of the new book, Walk Through This, which explores how nature helps us learn to forgive through the lens of her own story of trauma and forgiveness. It's her work in that book that helped me realize this impact nature can have on our lives. Sara, welcome to the Humans Outside podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm thrilled.
So we start our podcast episodes imagining ourselves in our guest's favorite outdoor space. Where are we with you today?
So the Grand Canyon has always been my space. That's been my healing. That's why I lead retreats there now with men and women through their own healing, because the Grand Canyon is so metaphorical of life. When we're talking nature and humans, you go deep into the canyon, just like we go deep into ourselves when we're healing. We sit there, we feel, we process, we connect, and then we hike out an entirely different person who is transformed from the experience. So I would say the Grand Canyon. Let's go there. Let's go to the bottom.
Cool. All right.
Lying underneath the stars, watching them shoot, the shooting stars, lying on the Silver Bridge. That's my favorite spot at night.
Love it. I've never actually been to the Grand Canyon. It's one of those places still on the bucket list. So I'm excited.
Girlfriend. Well, let's go. We're here now.
Yeah. We had an opportunity to do a major trip to a national park, and the only time that we could really make it happen was in the beginning of this season in May. So like pre-Memorial Day. And it wasn't the perfect time to hike the Grand Canyon, which is what I wanted to do. So we skipped that and went to Yellowstone. But it was beautiful. Next time, Grand Canyon for Amy. So, okay. Your work looks at the impact of nature on forgiveness, but it does that through the lens of your own story. So tell us your story.
So, I will give you the very quick version of this. That's how I always start that, because telling my story is pretty deep and there's a lot there. When I was 17, I was raped by somebody that I knew. And I ended up having a child out of that experience, through that horrible experience. And my healing began at 17 and I grew up in a very small village in Wisconsin, and I would go outside and I would sit in the cornfields and I would walk next to the creek and watch the brook, just like, well, we call it back there, the little water floating by and the things that were happening around me. And that became a big healing space for me. And then fast forward at the age of 40, I found out that my husband of 17 years had been betraying me for most of our marriage with men. So the trauma from 40, it was really interesting because it brought up a lot of what had happened to me at 17. And what is also fascinating is how I healed from that trauma. When I was 17, my mom used to walk me down Main Street of our village, and she would say, "Hold your head high. People will believe you someday," because there were a lot of people that didn't believe me. I tried pressing charges, he never, apparently there was insufficient evidence, which just still blows me away to this day. there was so much trauma that happened around that age. But really, it was through my mom's words, through the actions of walking through this. And
Mm-hmm.
then now at the age of 40, healing from healing from trauma in the same way, I would just go into nature. Like that became my safe space. It was where I was called, I guess you could say. And it's where I found who I am today. I'm now 47, happier than I've ever frickin' been. I have climbed many, many trails. I just got off the John Muir Trail for 22 days this last summer, manifested everything from my lit agent on the trail to my publisher to a relationship I'm in to, I mean, everything down the line. And it truly, nature connects us in a way that you will never, ever find when you are sitting in four walls. You just can't. And
Hmm.
so that's been my existence. And that's how I ended up with this book. And we're working on a documentary right now, too, where we are, it's a story. It's also called Walk Through This, a story of starting over. And it's my life and how I have transformed from 17 through who I am today and moving forward.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So powerful. Wow. And I just love that that visualization of one manifesting and just believing in what you're doing through connecting with that on the trail, but
Hmm.
then two, this idea of the expansiveness that when you said four walls, right, and then talked about being outside, I had this visualization of the walls falling away,
Hmm.
right, so that when you are outside, out of that box, uh the it has room for your mind and really your person to expand beyond the constraints of that box. It's like that's just a very powerful visualization to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And my book, it's interesting. In my book, we do a lot of visualizations.
Hmm.
There's downloadable visualizations, meditations in my book. And it always goes back to what I learned on the trail. My book is
Yeah.
7 steps to forgiveness, but it's also about the 6 steps prior to get you to
Right.
forgiveness, which is really deepening your understanding of self, learning from your experiences in life, not allowing them to take over your everyday existence, and really being the person, humans outside, the human that you choose to be in this world within your lifetime, because we all have choice. And
Mm,
what happens to us does not define us. It's what
yeah.
we do with it that does.
Yes. And that you can control yourself, and that's about it.
Mhm. Well, and it's true. I always say, what's fascinating? Can I? So, what's fascinating is being on the trail has provided me more life lessons than anything else in this world.
Mm,
Um, we just went to go climb a special someone quote in my life, and I just went to go climb Mount Baldy yesterday. And we got up halfway and the winds were just howling. And it was like a moment in time where we both looked at each other and we went, you know what, this isn't, we gotta get off. Like this isn't the
yeah.
place to be right now. And it's not about the destination. And people say this all the time. It's about the journey. It's about every step. And I think that we hear that in our head, but we don't always believe it in our heart. And when
Right.
you go outside and you truly experience life, living, not just life, but living, that's where we have on the trail, that's where we have our experiences that allow us to step into the human that we choose to be.
Right.
More life lessons on the trail than I've ever, ever, ever could have in any other time within, living in society.
Yeah. Yeah. It's being faced with something hard that is not anything like what you would be faced with inside or in your
Right.
regular life, or so it seems in that moment, right?
Mhm.
So, a great example, I just, we were on vacation. I had the opportunity to go do a little cliff jumping into the ocean. Not really my style.
I
Uh,
love it. I
but
would have done it.
yeah, but I was like, okay, like I don't really enjoy jumping off stuff. It's just not my favorite thing. Okay. But gonna go do it now,
Hmm.
right? Because of that. Um, and while you could say, like, I'm probably never going to encounter a actual physical cliff in my house that I need to jump off of, I am going to encounter cliffs, so-called,
Hmm.
in my work that are scary. And you have to make that decision that despite the fact that you're standing on top of this thing, telling yourself you really do want to jump off of it, and you know it'll be fine because you just watched other people. My knees were literally quaking Like they're like, I'm looking at my knees and they're shaking.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a physical reaction, right? But you have to say, I don't care about that and I'm going to jump anyway.
Right.
Um, and that's not something I would be like, that actual physical circumstance is not in my house, but there sure are circumstances like that. And I now know and have a hold on that analogy that I can implement that in my work life and in my family life, that even when your knees are physically shaking, you can still do this hard thing. And it is enjoyable in its own way.
Well, so fascinating you bring this up because yeah, people ask me all the time because I'm, like I paddle 4 miles off into the ocean and, I paddle at night. I love paddling at night. I love doing things at night because to me, that's where we remind ourselves that it's the same during the day. It's just a little different, right? Like
Right. Right.
you're just maneuvering through it a little differently. Um, but what's fascinating to me is when you're talking about that is just living in our comfort zone. So many times we live with what we think we live in our comfort zone, but there's a lot of uncomfort there. But we become so accustomed to living with what is uncomfortable actually in our
Mm.
life. If it's
Mhm.
toxic relationships, if it's jobs that we don't like, if it's whatever it is, like we
Mhm.
become comfortable with that, and there's a lot of I could go way into this trauma bonding, the whole 9 yards. That said, the one thing that I have learned more than anything when I've been outside is that when we allow ourselves to feel, when we are aware, when we listen, right, to if it is ourselves, if it is the signs around us, if it is the people we pass in our life who have stories that are similar to ours that we can learn from or share, whatever, or teach, whatever it is, when we can broaden our comfort zone, that is actually where we begin to live, right? Which
Mm.
is, we're not here to just experience life, we're here to live. And so
Mm.
that is where we can also see things a little differently, have more clarity, and jump off the damn cliff.
Yeah.
Like, because truthfully, the other thing is we're only born with two fears in our life. Did you know that?
Mm.
The fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Everything else in this world is created by, well, society.
Mm.
And so to me, and I always say, like, this is the created world, like what we live in when we're in four walls. This is the created world. I prefer to live out in the real world, which is like, you know, outside of the four walls, like get our butts outside and really experience
Mm.
the awe and wonder of life, of living.
After I jumped, I decided that I probably would benefit quite hugely by doing it again.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I went to get out. So what was interesting about that time is that, so despite having only 2 fears when you're born, I have a 3rd fear, which is spiders. I am just really
Oh,
afraid of spiders. Okay.
good Lord.
So I mean, really, I don't love falling.
Right.
Okay, but I am afraid of spiders. So I go to get out, and on the rocks are these black crabs, okay, that are, like, completely blended into the rock. And I sit there and I look and I think, 1, I already climbed up this cliff once without even seeing these crabs. That's scary. And 2, and 2, man, they kind of look like sea spiders. So I decide in that moment that these are the spiders of the sea and that I am mostly afraid of them. And I have this moment where I'm like, okay, so I can not do this because I can let a second totally unrelated to the thing that I'm trying to overcome right now, fear,
Mhm.
keep me from getting up off this rock. Or I can remember that I already did this once without getting, nailed by a sea spider and
Right.
and get up on the cliff, Amy. And I sat there for a second and I sort of hesitated and I thought about it and I got up I jumped off the cliff again. But it was interesting to me thinking about it later that was the same challenge that I had just overcome, and yet also different the
Mhm.
second time, that
Yeah.
it presented a new type of layer. And I felt like that was reminding me that in my work life or my personal life, even if you get used to jumping off the cliff a little bit, it's still going to have a new layer of problems and that being outside is teaching me to look at those things too.
Mhm. Mhm.
Just so many interesting interesting layers, all of them unrelated to forgiveness right now. So
Well, Or is it? Like it
Hmm.
actually, believe it or not, it is related. Like all of it is related to forgiveness. That's what's so
How?
fascinating. Um, Even jumping off the cliff is related to
Mm.
forgiveness because how many people choose to stand on the cliff and go, I'm not going to do that for whatever reason, right? And in reality, it's by jumping off the cliff and doing the things that we have never done before, or maybe are going to do it a little differently or see things a little differently that allows us to actually have the peace and the freedom in our life that we want. But
Hmm.
I truly believe that all of life, because the underlying theme of forgiveness is love, right? Like that's why we forgive. We go back to that self-love, that self-worthiness. Everything starts with self, and to create the world of which we want to live in our daily life. Like we don't want to hold on to the toxicity. You didn't want to hold on to the fear. So
Right.
it's like I'm going to jump and I'm going to let go of this so that I now can experience something that I wasn't experiencing 5 seconds earlier before I jumped.
Right.
So, and that's the same with forgiveness.
Mm.
People get very, very afraid of forgiveness. And I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you something. Once you step into that space, there is nothing like it. It is a practice every single day for self.
So define forgiveness for us, because I think that you and I talked before about this, how much I really truly enjoyed your book
Right.
so much more actually than I thought I would. But I mean, like
I love
here's a
it.
book about forgiveness. Are you going to like
Right.
it,
You're like,
Amy?
yeah, oh yeah.
Probably not. It's going to be hard, right? Okay, but I
All right.
think
A lot
that
of people say
people
that.
yeah, I think that people misunderstand what we're talking about with forgiveness, like
Yeah.
just off of just in day one. And I'm sure you have seen that in your work. So define forgiveness for us.
Well, here's what's funny. I never set out to like do this whole forgiveness thing, by the way. Never. I mean, I was like, wait, what? When I was asked to do the TED Talk, the whole forgiveness piece of my life really came full circle. This is the awareness and the listening when I was asked to do a TED Talk. And I thought the TED Talk would be about like nature healing or all the
Mm,
things or trauma. And then we kept circling back to why am I healing differently than so many, and quite frankly, more quickly than so many other people from deep, deep PTSD. Like, I mean, I had fear of, I actually had a moment of thinking, okay, well, if I just slam my car into the wall, I can let all of this go. I have 3 sons. So
mm,
obviously that was, always in the back of my mind as well. Um, but it always, when I was sitting there thinking about the topic of my TED Talk, it came back to forgiveness. And here's how this definition came into play. The person who was producing the documentary asked me how I define forgiveness. And
mhm.
I said to her, I define forgiveness as releasing, letting go of the pain that's been inflicted on me, right? Handing it back, always with love. Always, I do everything in this world with love. And when we looked up the definition of forgiveness, this is actually the definition of forgiveness in the dictionary. I'm reading this actually straight from my book. To cease to feel resentment against the offender, pardon or to forgive one's enemies, to grant forgiveness, had to learn to forgive and forget. And that forget piece is the piece that I was like, what the heck? Like, no, like
Yeah,
if you're so here's why this is so big, because for so many of us, we're taught just forget about it, let it go, brush it under the rug. Why
right.
do we have to revisit this? What is this about? Like, why do you keep bringing this up? But here's the thing: every single thing in your lifetime that has happened to you that has been difficult also deserves to be honored.
Mm,
Because when we allow ourselves to honor the difficulties, we can step out of it from a different space, see it from a new clarity, through a new lens. And that's actually where the healing begins. Right. And
yeah,
so this is how I define forgive. I define forgive as to acknowledge an offense and the consequences of that offense as truth. Remember that word truth. To choose to let go of negative feelings, that word choosing, and to cease to harbor animosity toward the offender. So it's always by choice from self. It always comes from within self,
hmm,
right? And so by allowing myself to go through this process of releasing or handing back the pain, when I've done the work where I'm like, okay, this is no longer serving me, I've learned from it, I'm taking responsibility for what part I can. Forgiveness for self always starts with self, right? Forgiveness always starts with forgiveness for self, self-forgiveness, and then forgiveness for others, and then forgiveness for the world. So when I can sit with that and honor my experiences, my difficulties, and I always did this out in nature, always, never within 4 walls. When I could do that, and connect more deeply with who I am, that's when I could step into the space of forgiveness and say, you know what, I am ready to let go, and I am ready to move on, and I'm ready to walk through all of it.
Mm.
And that's where the transformation happens.
Yeah, that's so powerful, because I really think that the thing that hangs so many people up is the forgetting thing. Like, you read forget, and I thought in my brain, hell no. Like,
Hell no, I'm not going to forget that all this happened to me.
yeah, why would I do that?
I'm
That
not going
sounds
to
so
pardon
dangerous.
this, right? Like, I'm not going to pardon you and say, oh yeah, what you did is okay. But this is the other thing that I just want to also state that's very, very fascinating. By forgetting anything, you're also not allowing the other person to learn from what they did.
Mm.
So I don't want to forget. There's twofold. Number one, because I want to honor my experience, but also the people that have hurt me most in my lifetime. I want them to learn from what they've done. I want them to actually go through their own forgiveness process of forgiveness for self, and to be able to say, I'm sorry, and to be able to
Mm.
forgive the world for whatever allowed them to get to that space as well. Right. And
Mhm.
so by forgetting anything, it's diminishing. It's actually, in my eyes, it's almost demoralizing, because I'm like, I don't, we need as a society to also do better. And you cannot do better by saying, forget that happened.
Right. 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 Hey humans, just a quick break to tell you how you can support the Humans Outside podcast. Did you know we're on Patreon? Patreon allows fans like you to support the podcast through a monthly pledge. By pledging a little cash each month to support the Humans Outside podcast, you can have access to my bonus features, guides, discount codes, and an exclusive episode on... You know what? Actually, just go check it out. You'll also get my eternal gratitude, of course. Check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/humansoutside. That's patreon.com/humansoutside. Now, back to the show. Okay, really getting into the nuts and bolts of how nature impacts this. Forgiving is not the first step, right? You need to, there's a lot of things before that. So let's talk for a second about why nature is important and how it is important to revealing how we handle conflict, boundaries, pain, and then finally forgiveness, because understanding all of those things is key to the last thing.
Right, right. So the reason that so much of my healing happened in nature is because, PTSD is real, trauma brain is real. We all experience it. The rumination of our life experiences, it's real. I know it myself. And the reason that nature worked so well is because when I could get outside, the frontal lobe of my brain would slow. That's where we have the ruminating. That's where we have the task mastering. That's where we have the checklisting. That's where we, right now, that's where I'm working from, quote, working from. But when we are out in nature, the back part of our brain, which is the cerebellum, that's what's allowed to rise. And that's actually where we start to have those clarity moments. That's where we can experience awe and wonder. And there was a study by UC Berkeley, and awe and wonder actually reduces PTSD symptoms by, I believe, 29% for people that are out in nature for a week. And so when we can get to that state in our mind, and this is where I do a lot of the work too with my clients, is allowing our mind to slow so that we can drop into our heart, because our heart is actually the piece that we want to heal. Right? Yes, we have the brain as well, but we really want to drop back into the heart space, which is the connection for self. If you when's the last time that anybody has put their hands over their beating heart and actually gone, wow, that is my heartbeat. That heart is mine. It's nobody else's. And that is my heartbeat that keeps me alive each and every day. And so when we can connect with that inner self and really, truly understand and deepening the connection and the relationship with self, that is where we can also then finally say, okay, I'm ready to let go of XYZ. I'm ready to forgive this person.
When you talk about frontal lobe versus say it again
The
for us, the
cerebellum.
cerebellum.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, one of the things I feel like you're describing is the difference between goal and intention. Um, Talk to us about, is that an accurate understanding? Because I'm very goal oriented. Like I have my little checklist book here, and we just came off of a vacation, and I realized that not one time during said vacation did I feel the need to create a daily list, which I do every single day except for those days.
Right.
And I'm really like kind of proud of the fact that I have this book full of lists. Okay. Weirdly, right? But
That's
I did
awesome.
not even think about them on this
Oh,
vacation. Instead, I thought about what I was going to do that day and what I was going to experience. And I wonder if that's sort of a difference between goal and intention. Clear that up for us.
yeah.
What
I
is
mean, I guess you
intention?
could.
How is it different? Why do we need one?
I guess you could actually say that. I've never really thought about it in that way, but sure. I mean, you could totally say that. So I used to be a very goal-oriented person too. I used to like have the list and the check off and the things. And you know what's funny is that this is where I'm like, thank you for all of the crap that I've lived through, because happiness isn't felt. True peace and happiness is not felt by simply checking off the boxes.
Hmm.
True peace and happiness is felt is by living in the moment,
Hmm.
right? And being with the one that you love, which if it's yourself or if it's with another person or wherever it is, right? And not only like within the connection of other people, but the connection of space, the connection of time, the connection of all of it, truly like all of it. Um, and so, the living intentionally each and every day, which is also what I do choose to do. And this is a part of the practice of living in this way and living with forgiveness. Um, that is allowing yourself to actually be more present in the moment and understanding that, be self-compassionate towards yourself. You're a freaking human being. You're not a human doing. Right. And so it's true, right? Allow yourself
It's so cheesy, but so
it's so
real.
cheesy, but it's so true. And I know, I mean, people used to say that to me too. And I'm like, what? And it's so true. You're not here. This is one of the questions that I always ask myself. When I'm 108 years old, I want to live to 108. What is my 108-year-old self going to say about how I'm living right now in this moment? Is she going to be proud of me because, ooh, I checked off the box? Or is she going to be proud of me because I'm actually sitting in the moment and allowing it to unfold?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My 108-year-old self is going to have stacks of stacks of okay, real confession, guys. I make myself throw out the books of checklists because I used to keep them. And I thought, this is insane. You have to throw them away.
Well, do you know what's very fascinating about that? So I obviously, like I said, I used to be that way. I used to have all of that. For me, I look back and I'm like, what was the reasoning behind, some of it might be your human design and all of that stuff too. And I get it. I fully understand. For me, it was always a safety mechanism. The more
Mm-hmm.
that I checked off, the safer I felt within my
Yeah.
own existence,
Yeah.
which I now look back and I'm thinking, oh, that was a complete trauma response.
Yeah.
Like for me, and it truly was, because I've been a mom since 17. I chose to raise my son and then I got married and I had two more boys. And so I'm a mom of three, single mom of three now. And that for me, that check off was like, okay, success. That was my way of also staying safe.
Yeah. I will say, so I sort of lost the habit for a while and then picked it back up again last September. And I will say I forget less stuff now. So there is like an actual
There's an
practical
actual
benefit to
practice
it.
too. Right.
But at the same time, oh, totally. I'm sure that if I look too closely at the checklist situation in my life, man, you're really diving deep here for me. And I feel a little raw right now.
Well, and I will say that I've got a list too. Like people always laugh at me because I still have my paper calendar. I'm so old school. I mean, it's in my phone too, but there is something about, having the list and making sure that you're getting it all done. Again, though, that truthfully is also because when you've experienced trauma brain, which I have, you lose some of your memory. And so for those people that don't know this, like trauma brain is a true thing. And so
Yeah.
you do start to lose some of your memory. And so it's this rebuilding of that, right? And going
Right.
and being able to bring those pieces back that have literally gone offline. So I get
Right.
it. I get it. I fully get it.
All right. Enough about my list, crazy list, Amy. I want to talk more about nature,
Yes,
okay? Because that's really why we're here, although apparently we're also exposing my weird habits.
I
Um,
love your weird habits. It's okay.
Thank you. What you do is retreats
Yes.
is sort of your core programming. Okay, so when you're on a retreat, you are not just passing nature by, you're experiencing it. So
Yeah.
talk to us about why that's important, about the difference between looking at nature
Hmm.
and experiencing nature and why that difference is important.
So I had somebody say to me recently, they're like, "Do you realize that you look at a bird flying over your head the same as you do a whale?" Because most people, it's like, "Oh, that's just another bird," right? But if a
Yeah,
whale surfaces in front of you, it's like, "Whoa!"
right.
Um, yeah, when I lead my retreats, and I do, again, I do these very intentionally, because I don't want people to be like, okay, I'm going to go through the Grand Canyon and just check it off, done. I saw the Grand
Mhm.
Canyon. I want them to experience it in every way: mind, heart, spirit, soul, body, like everything. So we do everything from meditating in nature. We sometimes do breath work in nature. It gets very, yes, it does get deep out through like coaching and stuff as well. But really that unfolds. I always say I facilitate these in a way that is for the people that show up for them, which is
Mm,
always beautiful. I mean, they're just, I want it to be, I'm an experiential learner. And also I learned through, or I healed through experiences. And so I want this to be a major, 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 major foundation to their own healing. So we do coaching prior to, and then we also do coaching afterwards. And the reason why is because it's not simply about the retreat itself, even though, yes, we
right,
spend 2 nights at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and we hike and we adventure, we connect. I also want it to be about this 3-month journey into self.
right.
So they're prepared. And I talk a lot about really being aware, be aware of the messages, be aware of the clouds that, float over your head, be aware of the birds and what type of bird it is. Because if you go back into any Native American culture, anything like that, um, there's messages that are given to you every day. And those messages are what we can actually listen to and learn from.
Mhm,
So it's not simply about, yeah, just let's go hike. It's about really experiencing all of what
mhm,
is around us.
mhm.
Um, when's the last time that and this is why I said through this episode, let's go to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, lie on the Silver Bridge, and watch the stars that shoot through the sky. When's the last time that you've done that? When's the last time that we've actually watched clouds and allowed them to be wondrous with you,
Right,
right? And so
right.
it's really about slowing down and allowing our frontal lobe to take a rest, back their cerebellum to rise, and be in awe and wonder, and just to really, connect.
I think I think there are 2 steps to building an outdoor habit, sort of the core of what we're doing here, right? There's building the outdoor habit, getting outside for that 20 minutes and making
Mhm.
that a part of your, a life or however long you're choosing to get outside. The second thing is doing it intentionally,
Right,
right? Making sure that it doesn't become just box checking once you have built the habit. For a while, it's going to be because that's what that habit building is, right? It's learning to do something and making sure you do it every day. But then the danger for someone like me who's now been doing this for, 1,300 days in a row is that it's just something I do every day. It's not something
right,
that I experience. And so I have to constantly encourage myself to stay on my toes and, am I going to hit that mark every day? No. So there's going to be some days that I just go out there and check the box. Um, I am proud to say, however, that it's not a literal box. It is never on my actual to-do list. It's just something I do every day.
hmm
But I have to be, and we do talk about this here a lot, intentional with how I'm doing it. I have to try to be in that moment because now that it's a habit, it slides into not being in the moment ever. And that's a constant thing.
So it becomes, I would say, and this is kind of how I look at forgiveness as well. It's not a one and done.
Right.
right? And so it's a practice. And so I'm the same way. I always build it into my day and I build it into my year. So if you want to talk about a goal, I guess that is a goal, but
Right.
I'm not really a goal oriented necessarily kind of person. I'm more of an intentional living kind of person, though I do have goals, but not like, you know,
Sure.
I don't live by the goal at
Mm.
the way that so many people do. Um, but I build it into my life. You
Right.
have to build it into your life. a
Right.
thousand percent you have to build it into your life. So, if it was 22 days on the John Muir Trail this last summer, or this year we're going to hit this High Sierra Trail again for 8 days, do it a little differently than I did it 3 years ago. Um, it's something that needs to also be brought in, yes, with intention, and also like if I can tell anybody anything, freaking create it. Hashtag create it. Like it's not, it really truly people overthink it. It's like, well, what about the gear? What about the spiders? What about, whatever it
Hey
is?
now.
I'm like, it's true. People, I mean, what about the snakes? I'm like, okay, wait, time out. I mean, what's the flip side about that? Like, what about
Right.
the
Right.
mountains? What about the water?
Mm-hmm.
What about the experience? What about the beauty? What
Right.
about the laughter? What about the fun? Right? Like all the other crap, I'm just going to say, will fall into line the way that it's meant to. I'm not saying do
Right.
it dangerously. I'm just also saying don't think so much about it. Just be
Yeah.
led by your heart. That's it.
So let's talk about forgiveness. We've already sort of established that there's a lot of intention that goes into it. You've said that it's a continuous process. We've defined what it is. Give us some actionable steps towards using nature to come to that end journey spot that is then a continuous journey spot.
Yeah, I do it every day. I've had to do it every day.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I wrote the book the way that I did. There's 6
Mhm.
steps to get you there. There
Right.
is, understanding self-worth and self-love more deeply, uh, which is huge, especially for people that have been betrayed or anything like that, who've been traumatized. We have to rebuild that self-worthiness and that self-love, learning how to set boundaries. It's understanding your values, understanding who you are, the foundation of who you are. It's, what do you do when it gets hard? That's why I
Mm.
put a chapter in there. What do you do when it gets hard? Allowing yourself to go back to the affirmations and saying, I am worthy. I am fiercely self compassionate. I am loved. So simple. And so there's the 6 steps. And the reason that I built it in through nature is because it's kind of like if you're going to talk about self worthiness, when you're sitting on and I mean no disrespect whatsoever, but sitting on a couch versus understanding self-worthiness when you are, lying on the grass underneath the clouds, watching the leaves fall down next to you and understanding that that's like true worthiness, right? You're worthy of the breath, you are worthy of
Mm.
the
Mhm.
wind, you are worthy of your senses, all of them. It's very different. And so
Mm.
when that's why I created the book that I did the way that I did was the 6 steps. And then when you get into forgiveness, you've already built that foundation. So it's not just like, okay, I'm going to go forgive now. It's
Right.
understanding yourself so deeply, you've built the foundation of self. So then when you do choose to step into forgiveness, you're ready to do it. And
Right.
I will say that it doesn't mean that you're not going to get hurt again or that you're not going to still feel the pain from the experience that you are also practicing to forgive with. I still feel the pain from my marriage, my failed marriage. I still feel the pain from the sexual assault when I was 17. I'm still working every single day on the forgiveness piece because that's that deepening of self. That's that more that understanding of self even deeper than what you thought you were at even a few days ago. That's the practice piece, though. It doesn't mean also that you negate, like say that this is the other thing about forgiveness. It's like, oh, I thought I forgave that person and now I'm pissed off again. Well, it's
Mm.
not, you're not negating all the work that you've done, right? That's why I say I forgive you versus I am choosing to continue to forgive you.
Yeah. And so we've talked about how nature is important to getting through to that point that you can do that, the understanding your worthiness, understanding your place in the world, understanding how you can conquer big things, understanding what that feels like. Um, Why the moment that you say I am choosing to do this, is nature and being in nature a important part of that, or is it really just the whole journey? It's like that big old picture.
So it's the big old picture, but then it's the moment,
Hmm.
right? It's the big old picture, all the work that you've done. Well, I hate calling it work because to me, it's like also play. Like I truly believe in, having fun with your healing as well, as crazy as some people think that is. But I truly do believe in that. But it's all of that work that then takes you to that moment of aha,
Hmm.
where you're standing. I always, with my clients, I explain to them, for me it was standing on a rock, and it's actually my Facebook picture, which my personal page, which I have not changed since then. I was standing on a rock looking out in Sequoia National Park. Somebody took the picture. They had no idea what was going on with me, but I just stood there, and all of a sudden I felt this like, whoa, this like overwhelming feeling, sensation. And I looked up and I saw two birds that floated overhead. They were just flying right over me, and then they split up. And I was like, okay, that's it. That's my moment. And it, for me, totally dropped into my heart and had this realization of, okay, I'm going to be fine divorcing. I'm going to be fine living on my own. I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to step into this space, and I don't want to be in my pain anymore. I want to
Mhm.
let go of that. And so it's all of the moments that I had prior to that that then led me to that one on the rock moment of, okay, I'm ready. I'm
Mhm.
ready to step out of where I'm at right now.
Yeah. So good. Okay, we've come to the end. I'm
Okay.
sorry to report. So,
We could keep
got
going
some
on and on and on.
leftover stuff. All right. You and I chatted before we record that you don't, and you mentioned while we were on here that you don't often think about the stuff that you use, your gear and that kind of thing. But nonetheless, we like to know that kind of thing because maybe somebody else wants to check it out.
Mm-hmm.
See if it can be the little gateway to making their experience better or whatever. Um, Up here in Alaska, we know that the right jacket saves lives, quite
Oh, yeah,
literally. So there
it
you go.
really
Okay.
does.
So talk to us about your favorite and most essential outdoor gear. What do you
Mm,
love? What do you use?
gosh, there's literally so many things. Um, there's so many things. When I was on the John Muir Trail, um, I will say that my favorite gear, which is going to sound so crazy, but I use a ULA backpack.
Okay.
Okay, love them. And they come with, this is going to sound so crazy, but like, just trust me on this. They come with straps, the thumb straps.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
They use,
So,
yeah.
uh-huh. I'm telling you, for me, and this sounds so simple, I'm all about the simplicity. I cannot hike without those. I have tried to recreate them when I have lost one, couldn't do it. Now, understand that that's pure, like for me, that's just me allowing myself to be in the flow when I'm hiking. I
Right.
just like them. Um, the other thing though is my jet boil. Girlfriend, I need a
Oh
jet boil.
yeah.
Wherever I go, like I cannot not have my jet boil. Coffee in the
Yeah.
morning, soup at night, period. That's how I am.
Yeah. Okay. If you are listening to this and have no idea what a jet boil is, it's like this cylinder stove that screws on to a little tiny fuel source that's
Mhm.
pretty, I mean, it's pretty lightweight. And little scary moment where you light it, like, is my face too close? What's about to happen here? Okay. And then it boils whatever's in it very, very quickly,
Yep.
thus the jet. And it is life, and I love mine too. And we take it skiing because must have coffee out of the back of my car. So
Well, and you know what I do a lot now is I hike summits at night. Like I'll hike
mhm.
during the night and then I go and I sit on top of the summit. And the other reason I love my jet boil is because I love watching the sunrise and drinking coffee. And
Heck
so,
yeah.
heck yeah, tried to do it yesterday, but the winds were just too
Oh yeah,
no.
it does. You do have to have like a wind situation. We have a podcast episode with a coffee company co-owner talking to us about the best way to make coffee
Oh,
outside. Um,
it's the
that yeah,
the best. I had a girl who showed up from one of my retreats one time. Oh my God, freaking love her. She's phenomenal. She brought her grinder. She brought everything. So we stopped, and we would stop and we would meditate. She's like, "Can I make some coffee?" I'm like, "Girl, absolutely." So she would grind her coffee, and we were like, "You're GCing in the GC. Get it?"
yeah,
grind
Yep.
coffee in the
It's
PC.
Great Canyon, yeah.
There you go.
Trail jokes. Okay,
Trail jokes.
last thing. Walk us out of here, giving us a picture and a moment to sit with you in your favorite outdoor moment. If you close your eyes, where are you? What are you doing?
So I would say, I have so many. The one would be actually when I had my big aha moment, but I'm kind of past that now. It was important, but now I'm like, yeah, okay, done. So I will give you this. Okay. So every trip that I do every year, and I want to share this with everybody because it's pretty important. Before I go out into nature, I set my intention. What is my intention for being out here? What am I healing from? What am I working through? What am I looking at? Whatever it is. 3 years ago, I went on the High Sierra Trail, and I did that to manifest and really deepen I wanted to get my lit agent. So I got my lit by the end of the year. I got my lit agent on December 31st of that year. The next year I did the High Sierra Loop, and my intention was to get my publisher. Awesome. This last year I went on the John Muir Trail, and I did get my publisher, obviously. This last year I went on it thinking that it was about pushing this book into the world. And on day one of that trip, and this is where I talk about the listening and the awareness, I watched 2 different couples get engaged on the John Muir Trail. One was at the top of Nevada Falls, and one was at the top of Clouds Rest. I've never seen people get engaged outside. Never. In all the years, all the moments I've had on the trail, I've never witnessed somebody get engaged. And that was my day of realizing. And I sat on the Clouds Rest that night, pulled out my phone. I was alone on Clouds Rest under the stars, and I had a conversation with self. It's actually day one of my podcast. I did a 2-part podcast on my John Muir Trail. And that was day one. And I sat up there giving my reflections of, okay, I thought I was here for one thing. I'm not. I get it. This is my even, deepening of self-love and understanding my worthiness and really wanting to step into a relationship, a partnership with another human being, which now I am. And there's a whole story behind that. Manifesting on the trail works. That's all I'm going to say. I'll get more public with that in the future, but I'll tell you something. If a book needs to get written, this is my next one, because it's freaking powerful. And that was it. Sitting on top of Clouds Rest that night under the stars, watching them. And I'm just like, okay, I get it. I'm listening. I hear you. And it was the most peaceful inner self experience that I have had in a very long time.
Love it. Sara, thank you so much for being on the Humans Outside podcast today. If people want to read your book, buy your book, check out your work, we've got links in the show notes to all of those things so that they can do that. And I just really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too. This has been fun.
That's it for this week's episode of the Humans Outside podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, give us a little love and leave a rating and review to make it easier for others to find the podcast too. And by supporting us on Patreon, you get access to exclusive supporter-only benefits while making sure we can keep the podcast going. A huge, huge thank you to our current supporters. Until next time, we'll see you out there.